You're listening to The Weekend Take. And now your host, Sean Schaefer.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special edition of The Weekend Take. I'm your host, Sean Schaefer, and joining me for this Defend the Crown tournament recap and discussion episode are writer, director, producer, entertainment attorney, and columnist for Script Magazine, Christopher Schiller. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing quite well.
And also joining us is box office analyst and creator of the animated series Amen, Jake Karnas. Jake, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
For listeners of the show, the Defend the Crown tournament was a tournament we held over social media over the last few weeks following the Academy Awards this year, in which we saw Parasite win Best Picture, but that left 8 nominees out in the cold. And one of the things that I learned from our Bestest Picture tournament while we were running it was people said, oh right, I forgot that movie won that year. Yeah, that shouldn't have won, this other movie should have won. So it gave me the idea of what if we saw if the popular opinion matched up with the Academy's choice. So we took the 8 nominees that did not win Best Picture, put them in a tournament against one another. The winner of the tournament would then go head-to-head in a popular vote against the 2020 Best Picture winner, which was Parasite. So we're here to discuss those matchups and to see if Parasite could successfully defend the crown. So, gentlemen, what we're going to do is we'll look at each of our quarterfinal matchups one at a time, as there's not many matchups in this tournament. We'll move on to the semis and the finals, and then we'll move on to the title match. Sound good?
Sounds excellent.
Yeah, I can do that.
All right. So, do you feel the Academy got it right this year in picking Parasite as the Best Picture? Chris?
I have been a long time advocate that Parasite was going to be the Best Picture winner, and will laud it as the Best Picture winner that I saw early on as often as possible, because I don't often get that right.
When you were at Telluride, you saw Parasite long before all the hype started, and in your Tweeview said that you thought that Parasite had what it took to be the Best Picture winner for that year.
Yeah, comparing it to what I had seen and what I had heard about for the films that were coming in this time, and this is Labor Day weekend of last year, it just seemed to be so unique and so out of the norm of what you normally expect to find in filmmaking of high quality, that I just walked out of that film and knew that this was something special. So I brazenly predicted it to be Academy Award winner, and will laud it for as long as I can.
All right. And Jake, how about you? Did the Academy get it right this year?
I personally have a belief that the Academy always gets it right, due to the fact that the general audience doesn't normally get involved when the J.D. Power and Associates Awards go out. But everybody happens to own a car out there, you know. They don't get involved with the J.D. Power. Why does everybody seem to think that they have any say at all in the Academy's decision-making? I think that 9,000 members of the Academy, you know, out of all of them doing their voting, it's an industry-specific award. It's going to be those people, whoever's in it at the time, whatever they say, of course they got it right.
That's a good take on it. I think my only, point to that would be that we see movies as entertainment, and since those involved in the industry get up on their own soapboxes to pontificate upon their opinions, we in turn, as the public, feel the equal need to get up on our soapbox and pontificate our opinions.
Sure.
Which is why I have a podcast in the first place, so...
Well, certainly, but at the same time, talking about anything with film, that's a real possibility. You can talk about anything, but I just have a problem with people saying the Academy got it wrong.
Well, it's also endemic with the industry, that the industry doesn't even agree on itself and who's the best picture.
Very true.
I mean, you can laud the Spirit Awards for picking Farewell. You could laud the Spirit Awards for their honoring The Farewell as an independent feature. You can go to the BFIs and look at all the films that had accolades that are just as powerful in the structure of what the UK thinks is the best film. The best thing about being the best film is that it's a limited number of people who've decided to agree on this one thing. Mm-hmm. It is not universal. And so it's perfect fodder to argue about if you don't agree with it, but it doesn't mean that you can change or that they got it wrong.
Mhm.
It's just that you just disagree with it.
Yeah.
There was a time period where there was like a list of boxes. If you checked them, you made yourself a very strong contender to win Best Picture. So,
But like everything else, everything changes. I mean, it used to be if you had Harvey Weinstein in your back pocket, you could get a Best Picture nomination, but that doesn't work anymore, and it's a good thing.
no, not that we started finding out that he was in other people's back pockets. No. So Little Women was nominated for Best Picture, and it was also nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay. Greta Gerwig had a prominent part, obviously, in both of those accolades, as she was the director of the film and also wrote the screenplay. And yet, she did not receive a nod for Best Director, which of course ruffled a lot of people's feathers. I personally did not get an opportunity to see Little Women. I don't know if either of you have, but if you did it seem like she probably should have been in the conversation to be nominated this year?
I haven't seen it. I have heard an awful lot about it and seen clips from the film. And it's one of those interesting things for an adaptation that she attempted to do. It's gotten a lot of interesting buzz because of the way that she tried to adapt it in a modern sense without making it a modern telling, which is a writer's accolade. Everything I've heard that's kind of questionable is that, was it the right film for right now? How did it come across? You had a great cast, but were they I mean, it's is Little Women played out almost is what they were talking about as a story. And so it's kind of hard to win interest in looking at it as a Best Picture or a Best Director category when you've got those heavy weights that are dragging you down because you didn't overcome them. But the writing accolades seem to be the thing that everybody was looking at. She's able to take a modernist writing approach to adapting a very old story. So
I say that we've seen it 45 times. How many more times do we need to see Little Women adapted into viewing media?
one less.
You know, it's just the same thing as Charlie's Angels. Everyone was going crazy about Elizabeth Banks last year. You know, well, you've just rebooted a thing that was a reboot already. We just saw it 20 years ago, and it's just too soon. Like, I don't know. Everybody gets angry about, you know, you're not going to see these women directors' films. Well, a lot of these women directors, not all of them, but, you know, Ava DuVernay, Elizabeth Banks, Greta Gerwig here, they're doing things we've already seen. Come up with something new. Do something that is you, specifically.
I mean, but for Little Women, the difference especially between Little Women and Charlie's Angels, was Little Women pulled in $110 million at the box office, and Charlie's Angels pulled off 10% of that.
I don't know. I don't remember the figure. That was terrible, though.
So the last question then, before we get into it, is looking across the kind of pantheon of awards shows. You know, you have SAG, you have the Golden Globes, Independent Spirit Awards, the Academy Awards. Do you feel personally that the Academy Awards is, to you, the top of the mountain?
I really enjoy the Academy Awards personally. That and BAFTA probably are the two tops when I think of just accolades. You know, just if you could get an Oscar or a BAFTA, I feel like you're doing quite a good job.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you're going for and what part of the party you're playing in.
Mm-hmm.
I personally would love to be nominated for an Oscar, and I just want to go to the Golden Globes to enjoy the party. It's one of those things where to be nominated is a good enough win for an Oscar as it impacts your career. Winning the BAFTAs is a great accolade for your European career. And if you have a particular trajectory where you're going, whatever you win in the award ceremonies that go on for 6 months during the run to the Oscars, any one of those wins is going to be something worthwhile, and you take them as you walk the path. And just that the Oscars are towards the end of that season, they make more sense that the best of the best will probably be up for contention by the time you get there. If you have a particular award ceremony that really appeals to you and speaks to what you want to do, like the independent spirits really speak to independent filmmakers. So winning that might be more prestigious than winning the Oscar if your forte is making films that are outside of the norm, outside of the studio system. So that might be your raison d'etre for filmmaking, to win one of those. It all depends.
Very well said.
And it wasn't a plug for my column.
Well, the last one I just saw you post was for the 10 cold hard truths.
Yep.
I didn't get to read it yet, but I'm assuming that's in there somewhere.
I can't actually remember all 10 of them. It was one of those things where I thought, listing out a whole bunch of issues of things you should be aware of that are true and that you need to deal with if you're going to work in this industry. It's a good read. You should read it. Now that was a plug.
And so I will. So with that, we'll get into our bracket here. We'll start at the top with the first matchup being Ford versus Ferrari versus Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And in that matchup, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood wins in convincing fashion with 73% of the vote and moves on to the semifinals. So, gentlemen, I guess we'll start with Jake this time and we'll alternate. So, Jake, what were your thoughts on Ford versus Ferrari losing to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, or what are your thoughts on the two films individually?
Well, I'd say it makes a lot of sense if you look at it from the box office perspective, because Ford versus Ferrari made less than Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So just looking at the audience vote with their money, more people went and saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I would say that's probably an accurate figure all around. Anyway, most people's friends went and saw the Tarantino film. That's definitely going to be certain. As for each, I don't know. It's Quentin Tarantino. That's fun. I don't know. Everybody enjoys going to see Tarantino films. Even The Hateful Eight, which I think is the lowest ranking on the list of his newer films after 2000 or so, after Kill Bill or so. In my friends' lists, most people don't like Hateful Eight the most. Django Unchained, the Inglourious Bastards are at the top somewhere. And Once Upon a Time in Hollywood has, over the past year, really taken up a lot of people's time and moved up on the list as well. On the other hand, I mean, you've got Matt Damon and Christian Bale versus Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt. So it's just absolute star power. But at the same time, I would have expected, personally, the Matt Damon Christian Bale movie to have been better received than Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
And so which dynamic duo did you cast your vote with in this matchup?
I actually went with Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio. I have to say, I did vote for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and the reason is because I didn't see Ford versus Ferrari.
And Chris, how about you? What are your thoughts on Ford versus Ferrari versus Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
I've seen both of the films, and I was actually surprised. Ford versus Ferrari, I saw actually at the same Telluride that I saw Parasite. And when I walked out of that film, I thought, this is a traditional, male-dominated, car-oriented, American kind of heroic two best friends who make good kind of film. It hits on all cylinders. I think I'm even quoting my tweet view from that, because I am that kind of a punny guy. But it's one of those things. One of those films that made you feel good. It didn't do anything wrong. It was perfect cinematography for a car movie. It revved its engines in the right places, and
oh, you're just full of them.
Yes, I am definitely full of it. The one thing that I had in that movie that I felt was undone.
The one thing you had to pump the brakes on.
Yeah. Okay. I'm trying to back up.
You're trying to go in reverse?
I'm trying to go in reverse. But I'm kind of slipping gears here. But the way that it treated the female characters. There was only really one female character in the film, and she was extremely well played by the actress, but it was just not given enough of a character, enough of a part in the story to really be a modern film where there's more elements like that. And that might have been its downfall. When you compare it to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, they actually took the female character who in real life most people would have subordinated and gave her a lot more screen time and a lot more impact in the film. Not many more lines, but a lot more of her presence was there to tell the story. And that might have been the way that these two films, for those who'd seen both of them, maybe why it's a more modern kind of filmmaking. Tarantino's latest effort actually is one of his better efforts. And by treating a modern sense of a historical perspective, I mean, it's two history films side by side. They're both based on real life, one a lot closer to the actual events of real life and one a lot more fanciful. They're historic depictions, but Tarantino treats it with a more modern sensibility, I guess.
All right. And so which of the two dynamic duos did you cast your vote for?
I actually cast my vote for Ford versus Ferrari, so I lost again in the last lap.
Oh, you had to get just one more in there. Well, since Once Upon a Time in Hollywood won, we don't have to worry about any more car puns.
Okay, I'll park it for now.
Oh, come on.
I'm just having a great time listening.
We don't need a backseat driver.
Oh my God. He'll be here all week, folks. Tip your waitress. Try the veal.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks.
So for me, I cast my vote for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I thoroughly enjoyed sitting down to watch that film. I actually, the first time, I went twice to see it in theaters. The best observation that I came out of it was the first time I saw it, I found myself like checking my watch towards the end of Act 1 and into Act 2 because the pacing is just very lethargic. It's very slow. And it kind of, and even for a Tarantino film, it's very slow. Coming out of the theater, I was like, yeah, it really picked up in the last third of the film, and I really enjoyed it. And I was trying to explain it to my wife, and like many Tarantino films, I have a lot of trouble explaining it in a succinct manner to anyone. So I was like, look, you're just going to have to come see it. And so I took my wife to see it. On a second viewing, I really got to enjoy the pacing much more because it's a hangout movie. You're just hanging out with Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio and their characters, and then you're just kind of drifting along with them, hanging out, being a fly on the wall, and then something big happens, and then you're just hanging out with them until the next thing happens. So I really enjoyed it. And like Jake, unfortunately, I cast my vote for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood also because I did not see Ford versus Ferrari, but also it didn't, I don't know, even from the trailers, it didn't seem like something that would rev my engines.
Ooh.
Yeah, see, I got one in there too. I'm finding as I do these episodes, there are a lot of genres that I don't tend to take in. Like on the Bestest Picture tournament we talked about, I don't take in war films generally. I don't take in Westerns normally. And now that I really think about it, I'm not a car movie guy either.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a car movie person. So that evidenced by the fact that I've never seen a single Fast and the Furious film. And I think that that's more of an attribute to me than a detriment.
I saw 1 and 3. No, I saw 2 and 3. 2 and 3. I didn't even see the first one. It's kind of like The Hobbit. I didn't go see the first one, but I still got the story when I saw the 2 and 3.
As I said, with that, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood moves on to the semifinals. So let's find out who Once Upon a Time in Hollywood's going to go up against in the semifinals. So in our second first-round matchup, we saw The Irishman go up against 1917. And in that matchup, much like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, 1917 has a very convincing victory, taking home 71% of the vote and moving on to the semifinals to go up against Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So this time we'll start with Chris. Chris, what were your takeaways from The Irishman versus 1917?
Well, as you know, I saw 1917 with you, in fact. I have not seen The Irishman, but I feel like I've seen The Irishman because of all the discussions that I've been involved with and heard about its production and how they went about doing the things that they were doing with it, especially the de-aging techniques that they used to get the film done. It was one of those films that should have had a lot smoother run to the awards and a lot of accolades coming out of it because of everybody that's involved and everything they were doing together. And something along the way just kept scraping along the sides like it wasn't a smooth production. It didn't actually end up doing the things that you would feel that it deserved to do, giving everybody that was involved, and everybody was doing things as they always did. Fantastic acting, fantastic directing, the whole nine yards. They had the budget they needed to do all the effects that they needed. But the fact that it was having these issues might have led to it not being able to overcome 1917. And as we discussed after we saw 1917, the technical issues to pull that film off, which made the impression that it was a single take camera shot through the entire thing, was very effectively pulled off. And I give a ton of credit to Roger Deakins for being able to plan out something that felt so natural in how the technical aspects of that film got pulled together, that you weren't lost in the technical aspects of it. You were watching the story. You were watching these two buddies run through the front lines to get and save people's lives. And you were wrapped into that. And everybody I've talked to about 1917 who've seen it has said that same thing. They were surprising themselves at how invested they were in the story. Most of the people I talk to aren't war film aficionados. I happen to be a war film aficionado, but most of these people still love the film, even though it was a war film, because it was a buddy film more than anything else. It was a quest film more than anything else, and extremely well executed and beautifully put together. And I think it's in one of those examples of a film that shows how cinematography can really add to the whole feel of the performances gelling. There's a ton of stuff that was being done by Deakins' team that made the mood intensify. Even though you can see the fear that these guys were having, the determination these guys were having in their great performances, the elements that were thrown into the cinematography of it were just stellarly supporting and even carrying at times that physicality, that impact. So 1917, as a technically challenging film that succeeded much more so than The Irishman, I think is why it won so handily, because it's pleasing and you don't know why it's pleasing, but it's definitely there.
Where did you cast your vote in this matchup?
I went with 1917.
Were you surprised at all when the Academy Awards happened that The Irishman took home 0 of the 10 nominations that it got?
I think by the time that the Oscars happened, the problems that The Irishman was having garnering a fan base, garnering a swell of attention, had already started to be evident. Martin Scorsese's direction of The Irishman and his discussion about disliking the streaming venues and then making a film that's owned by Netflix and goes straight to streaming virtually after a short window of theatrical release. It kind of felt like the industry had an opportunity when he missteps with this film just a little bit to completely ignore him. Give him the nod for the nomination, but not give him the awards that he would normally just step on stage and take without even being announced. He didn't earn that one this time, and he basically kind of shot himself in the foot by not turning in a great film. He turned in a decent film, an adequate film, but it wasn't as great as it could have been or should have been for him to be able to live in that world that he had built around himself.
Jake, what were your thoughts on The Irishman versus 1917? Now, with The Irishman, obviously, it did have some theatrical release, but nothing to speak of.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts on this matchup?
Well, for one, Martin Scorsese opening a movie on Broadway premiering it on Broadway, then goes to streaming. It's just so bizarre, especially after his he didn't provoke the argument against the Marvel fans and everything, but when asked a question and saying, "I just don't think it's cinema," and then himself not doing cinema, I really agree with what Chris said about being snubbed. Maybe this was just a way to shut him up for a minute, take a look at what you've just done. You've said something about these people. What about you? I find it very interesting to put out a 3-hour-long movie about some stuff that nobody really remembers in the base that you're trying to hit right now. This movie was made for older people. I feel like 1917 kind of hit it for everybody, all across the board. Young people too old could enjoy this film. The Irishman you need to have some general knowledge about Jimmy Hoffa and the Teamsters.
Oh, that's what it's about?
Yeah. You don't get that for the first 2.5 hours.
But that last hour to make it to run up to 3.5 hours.
Yeah, it's killer. I cast my vote personally with 1917. Just in the kind of way that Chris said, to stick it to the old man. Martin Scorsese's fun and everything. He's great. He won his Academy Award for best director or best picture for The Departed?
Well, one for Best Picture, I know for sure.
Because I remember it was Francis Ford Coppola, George Lucas, and Steven Spielberg presenting the award, and I was like, well, I know who won. That was the end of it for me. I was like, great, he finally did it. He didn't need to get the Lifetime Achievement Award. But yeah, I always feel good when I see somebody actually getting the award for doing the thing and not having to have them pander to, oh, hey, sorry we didn't give you anything before, but you're going to die soon, so here you go. He got his, and then he said some stupid shit last year, and this was his comeuppance for that.
For me, I cast my vote obviously with 1917 as well. 1917 is my pick through every matchup it's in. Kind of like what Chris was saying earlier, I'm one of those people who is not a war movie aficionado. In fact, I typically don't take in war movies at all, as I alluded to earlier. But I made an exception for this because it was Roger Deakins, and he's my favorite cinematographer. And it was just an experience, that movie, 1917. I mean, just, from the technical aspect, it felt very natural. It just kind of felt like we were on this journey, right down to some of the small things that were done, or even some of the big things that were done. Like, one of the scenes that's going to forever stick in my memory as a cinematographer myself is the scene where he's going through the ruins of the city at night, and the whole scene is lit by these flares being shot off in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is just a beautiful and magical scene right there, just from the look of it. As far as The Irishman goes, I like Martin Scorsese. I like a lot of his previous work, but from what I saw on Netflix, because you could watch a bunch of clips and trailers, it really kind of felt like it was Martin Scorsese being Martin Scorsese in a mob film. Like, it didn't seem like we were going to any new places. It just seems like we were just, repackaging the wheel and putting it out there and calling it the moving circle instead of the wheel. Yeah, I couldn't get behind the Irishman, which is unfortunate because there's a lot of great talent in that movie as well, but they're also playing the characters that they have played time and time again, and for some of them, time and time again from Martin Scorsese. So I got behind 1917 on this one. And also, I know it was just something that he said when he said the whole thing about the Marvel Cinematic Universe and comic movies not being cinema. But it did strike a chord with a rather large population of moviegoers, me included, because it is possible to make cinema of a quote-unquote comic book movie, as we're going to talk about one of the matchups coming up in Joker. As I said, that sets up a semifinal matchup of 1917 versus Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So we'll move on to our third quarterfinal matchup, which sees Jojo Rabbit going up against Marriage Story, another streaming exclusive film that got a Best Picture nomination. And in that matchup, Jojo Rabbit takes home the victory with 60% of the vote and moves into the semifinals. We'll start with you, Jake, on this one. What were your thoughts on the matchup of Jojo Rabbit versus Marriage Story?
I have no clue. I really don't. Marriage Story, Netflix movie. I have no clue. I didn't watch it. I just can't sit down and watch movies on Netflix. So, same with The Irishman. I mean, I watched I think 25 minutes of The Irishman, and I saw it. So you look at Marriage Story. Maybe I'll go watch Adam Driver and Scarlett Johansson be married for a second or something. I don't know. That sounds fun. But yeah, Jojo Rabbit. That one's the one I voted for because I feel a little closer to it being Jewish and all. That one and Taika Waititi. Give me a break. That guy gets my vote. I really have no clue though because I didn't see either one of them.
And Chris, how about you? What were your thoughts on Jojo Rabbit versus Marriage Story?
Well, I did see Marriage Story. I haven't seen Jojo Rabbit. I think that the uniqueness of the storytelling and the risks being taken and seemingly being well received by audiences, that Jojo Rabbit deservedly won this one. And it's like Scarlett Johansson up against herself in this particular contest.
It is indeed.
Oh yeah! Wow, you just blew my mind.
But when I saw Marriage Story, I talked a lot about it being a tour de force for actors' solo performance clips for auditions from now till forever. Because there's wonderful lines being written and stated by actors, and you could really chew the scenery with the script that's written there. It's just not two characters that you actually care about as human beings. And so even though it may be true to life of the marriage story of a marriage falling apart and its consequences because neither person moves from being who they are, the self-centered people that they are, and they shouldn't be married, they shouldn't be the subject of a film, but they'll have great dialogue around them in the meantime, which is one of the problems I had with it. Extremely well written for the actors to say the lines, but not so much for a story to be told to an audience, if that makes sense. So I think that because Jojo Rabbit took risks and delivered on them, and Marriage Story was kind of a nice kind of slice of life, but not the kind of life you want to look at.
On the flip side of that, I saw Jojo Rabbit, but I did not see Marriage Story. And Jojo Rabbit for me was really just unique storytelling and filmmaking. I know it's adapted from a short story, so it's not completely original material, but it is based off a short story. But what Taika Waititi does with this film is really amazing. Just also his portrayal as Adolf Hitler is priceless. I mean, it's his comic relief as the least comical figure in history is just great. I mean, even if he is just the imaginary friend of Jojo, but Scarlett Johansson going up against Scarlett Johansson in Jojo Rabbit, I feel is probably, from what you're telling me about how Marriage Story is, she is the opposite of what she does in Marriage Story. Because in Jojo, she is very subdued, but direct and purposeful in her delivery and her lines and in her character. It's not so much the tour de force, I'm going to use this for my self-tape auditions from now to eternity, but what she does is great in the film. Marriage Story hits far too close to home for me personally to even sit down and watch it. My wife suggested taking it in. I kind of just looked at her and was like, this is really where you want to go? This is what you want to do? We should probably not watch this film. So we didn't, and I probably won't. The biggest takeaway I could take from Marriage Story is really Adam Driver. I mean, here's a guy who, at this point, has to do everything he can to distance himself from the Star Wars franchise, and he is doing it fantastically, because as long as he can turn in stellar performances like what he's been raved about for Marriage Story and other films of 2019 and before, he will not have to live under the rock of being Kylo Ren from the Star Wars sequel trilogy. I cast my vote for Jojo Rabbit, and Jojo Rabbit moved on. It's in the semifinals now.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks.
Let's see who they're going to face in the semifinals as we look at our final quarterfinal matchup, and that pits Joker up against Little Women. And in that matchup, Joker took home the victory with 59% of the vote. And so Joker will move into the semifinals to go up against Jojo Rabbit. So, Chris, looking at Joker versus Little Women, what were your thoughts on that matchup and the outcome?
Well, this one I had to judge just on reputation because I didn't actually see either of the two films. I personally voted for Joker, even though I've heard a lot of the issues about, is this the kind of anti-hero we want to accolade? The reasons for him becoming the star that he became at the end of the film, is it truly something we want to encourage and have people cheer for at the end of a movie? That's kind of a political statement kind of thing that they didn't necessarily want to be the main focus, but it was definitely something they didn't shy away from, which in a sense is brave, but I don't know whether it's the right move in this political climate. And Little Women was trying to make a statement in the opposite direction. As we've discussed before, it was one of those things where there were too many extra baggage. Was this the road well trod too much so that it wasn't, people were tired of seeing the Little Women films? That's something that will determine by the time the next person tries to make a Little Women film. But on a writer's note, it's probably a good thing that the Joker won, and that for Marriage Story to lose as well, because with Noah Baumbach and Greta Gerwig living in the same house, being nominated for both screenplay categories beside each other, if either of them had won the accolade, it would have been really tough in that household, especially if the other person did not. So it's one of those rare cases, and I still wonder if it's the only time in the history of the Oscars that the same household had two writers that were up against, well, not up against each other, but both in nominations for a writer's Oscar.
And Jake, how about you? What were your thoughts on the Joker versus Little Women matchup?
Well, I specifically voted for Joker because the only thing I could base it on was either going Joker or the 1868 novel. So I went with Joker. Yeah, no, I don't know. With the Joker, great. The ending was fun. It's great to see Robert De Niro play Alec Baldwin. It was fun. From the trailer, I mean, spoiler alert, we've all seen these things, right?
I haven't seen either of these two, but don't worry about spoiling it for me.
I mean, right? Just go read a comic book. We've got the part in the trailer. They show the girl. They show what's her name? Zazie Beetz.
Yep.
Right? They show her. I'm sitting there and watching the trailer. I said, "She's not real." Close enough. I was so close to being right. She was real. She just didn't have the relationship with the guy that he had in his head with her.
Right.
I just felt it was. I don't know. I probably should have voted for Little Women because it was less predictable. I don't really know. I'm just kind of upset with the fact that Joker ended up making up so much money. I mean, it was number one on that whole list, on the list of all these films. It made the most money.
First $1 billion R-rated comic film.
Yeah, and DC is happy because they've been trying to do that for a while since Christopher Nolan was on board. I think it's acceptable. Don't think it's that great of a film personally. What is that? Todd Phillips, right? That's the Hangover guy.
Yep.
Road Trip? Did he do Road Trip too?
Yes.
Yeah, it's nice to see him have moved on from, making those Judd Apatow type of films and then move on to continue to making something of, a little bit more worth. It's not just straight laughs. It's there for, the telling an actual story.
Well, I mean, in this case, it was Todd Phillips doing his best Martin Scorsese impression.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. Because I remember when they were talking about the Joker movie, we might have a Martin Scorsese Joker movie. I was like, wouldn't the Marvel fans have freaked out if that had happened? They would have died if he was directing a DC movie talking about how comic book movies aren't real cinema. Their heads would have exploded. I really don't have any real thing to say about the Joker versus Little Women because I didn't see Little Women, but I have read the book, and I've seen, I think, 4 other adaptations of it. So who cares? Who cares? Go write something new. I'd like to see either some new original content or adapt something that hasn't been adapted frequently. There's ways to do this. We can do this. No comic books, no other, but whatever. We'll figure this out, I hope.
We're about to go into a phase of, well, have you tried unplugging it and plugging it back in? Because all of Hollywood is about to go on hiatus due to coronavirus concerns. So,
which gives me hope that people are going to be bored enough to come up with their own stories.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. We're going to try and hit the reset button. We're going to unplug it and plug it back in and see if it works.
Well, I'm just hoping that they don't end up watching some old movies and saying, hey, I have an idea.
All right, let's remake this one.
I haven't seen Guys and Dolls in a while. Would you like to see Guys and Dolls?
The answer is always no.
I hope not. Yeah, cut it out with that. Stop putting that out in the universe.
We'll move into our semifinals now. We're at our final four here, and we'll look at the first semifinal matchup, which is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which in the quarterfinals beat Ford versus Ferrari, as it goes up against 1917, which in the first round beat The Irishman. And in that matchup, 1917 takes home the victory again, this time with 64% of the vote. And so 1917 moves into the finals. Jake, we'll start with you. What were your thoughts on 1917 getting past Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? Because we were talking about in the first round, everyone likes to check out a Tarantino flick, but 1917 is a special kind of film. So what were your takeaways?
Yeah, I think it maybe might have had something to do with like proximity to when the vote was happening. Because everybody had seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in, July?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it came out July 26th, I think.
1917 was still in theaters, of course, when the vote was happening, as the Oscars happened and everything like that. I think that might have had something to do with it. People had just seen 1917 and realized, wow, it's pretty good. Because, I mean, yeah, that's the other thing we were talking about earlier with the proximity to when it's happening, the end of the award seasons, etc. More people had 1917 in their head. They'd just seen it. And, I mean, it's visually a better film, I feel. So...
Well, I feel they're also two very different films, and I'll get into it when I get to my turn. Because one is a film with, in Tarantino fashion, a lot of dialogue versus a film that has very little. These are two films at very different ends of the spectrum on a lot of creative notes. But where did you end up casting your vote in this matchup, though, Jake?
I think I still went with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I enjoy that type of writing. Visuals are great and everything like that, but a good writer, I feel, can really... You can do anything. With the visuals, you might not have the ability to do it, but if you've got a good script, you've got a good movie, probably.
I can't argue with that.
That was one of the things that surprised me, was that 1917 garnered an original screenplay nomination, because I just don't know what about the story from a screenplay. Guys go from point A to point B, and some things happen in between. I can't really get what garners it an original screenplay nomination, but that's entirely different discussion. Chris, how about yourself? What were your takeaways from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood versus 1917, and where did you cast your vote?
I agree with the masses. I went with 1917. But I do agree with you that usually a script will win me over because I write them and I know how hard it is to get them right.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, 1917 script was a anomaly for me. I did not think that it was well written for the dialogue. But the other aspects of writing a screenplay is setting up the stage and the things that you go through to adapt what, as I learned from reading the credits, a story the director's grandfather or great-grandfather had told about his experience and his retelling of the story of a real-life event that happened. Taking that and making it dramatically interesting. When you think about it, okay, we're going to have a movie and two guys are going to walk about 14 miles through the mud to the other side of a room, and you never see very much more than the walls of mud on either side of them. That sounds like a good movie, doesn't it? To be able to pull that off in any fashion, you have to set up what's going to happen. It may not be dialogue driven, but the writer is still in control of, then this happens, and then we escalate by going through this room that has got booby traps in it, and this is what's going to happen after the booby traps. And it's like, oh, wait a second, that's a different take on the concept of they just walk through a room and get up on the other side of the front lines.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of accolade for writing, I can accept it after I think about it for a while. Tarantino's Once Upon a Time, I always have a difficulty when he's having fun with himself. And several times in his career, he has taken a script and just said, I can get away with this. Let me see where it goes. And one of the aspects of him doing that is he doesn't have producers around him to pull him back into, it's still got to be entertaining to everybody when he goes out there. It's not just, we're going to enjoy it because it's a Tarantino film, and so whatever goes, goes. You really do need to have some of the characters that he popped in there and were a fabulous little bon mot sitting in the story. They're just there, and there's no connection to the rest of the story he's telling because he's jumping from point to point to point. And he needs a little bit more reining in for his scripts to be a cohesive whole, but there will always be a Tarantino whole if you follow that logic.
Sure.
I mean, like, for instance, the whole Daydream Bruce Lee memory sequence that Brad Pitt's character has, that Cliff has, everybody in that whole sequence of scenes is entertaining as hell, but it doesn't do anything to the story.
It's always been my belief that Tarantino would have been a much better filmmaker, and I'm not taking anything away from his talents, if someone would be a producer who would tell him no occasionally and make him have to prove it. Make him have to say, this is why we earn it at this stage in the game. And if somebody were able to do that, where he would respect them and be able to say, okay, I'll sit back, I'll go back and do a rewrite to make it work, and let's see how that happens. If he had more people like that in his corner, I think he would be easily winning a lot more awards than what he has been, and he'd be living up to the reputation that he thinks he deserves, or at least expresses that he thinks he deserves. Otherwise, he's just a former video store clerk.
Yeah. Yeah, he's Randall Graves. So I always looked at it from Clerks.
Yeah.
That's just Tarantino if he stayed. He never met Lawrence Bender or whatever the hell happened.
That would be a wonderful story to tell the Tarantino origin story, as if all he did was sit in a video store and dream about becoming the Tarantino, but he's still in a video store today.
Oh my God.
There you go.
That's his 10th film. We just have to get him to write it.
Talk about having fun with himself. I mean, could you imagine Tarantino writing that film?
Oh, I can. And I would love to see that film. Please, Quentin, if you're listening to this podcast, please make that film.
The Tarantino writing Tarantino's story would probably be almost as entertaining as the real life film that's coming out soon of Nicolas Cage playing Nicolas Cage in a movie about Nicolas Cage. This was probably the toughest decision I had in the bracket, but I did end up casting my vote for 1917 because, as I mentioned in the first round, I thoroughly enjoyed Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, especially upon a repeat viewing. But yeah, I mean, it's just undeniable the power of 1917 as a film, as a piece of cinema. So I cast my vote with 1917. Just technically, it's astounding. I got to say, I really did love the Tarantino's love letter to Hollywood in 1969. I mean, that everything about that was just so cool to observe as somebody who, it predates me, so I couldn't actually experience what that was like. So, I mean, I know it's fanciful and it's probably not historically accurate, but it's fun to think it was like that. All right, so 1917 has made its way into the finals. Let's find out who 1917 is going to go up against in the finals. So in our other semifinal matchup, we've got Jojo Rabbit, which in the first round defeated Marriage Story, going up against Joker, which in the first round defeated Little Women. And in this one, this to me is probably the upset of the bracket. I was not expecting this outcome, but Jojo Rabbit takes home the victory with 55% of the vote and moves into the finals to go up against 1917. So these are both films that took chances and took risks in their writing and in their creation. But Chris, what were your takeaways from this semifinals matchup?
I thought that they both took risks, and they both were surprising films. I think that Jojo Rabbit was surprising in a pleasant way as to how it pulled off what it tried to do. And Joker was surprising in a negative connotation way in what it attempted and actually pulled off. And then you had to live with it. Again, I have not seen either film, but of the two films, the one I would want to see, the one that will be on my Netflix queue, is Jojo Rabbit. And I think that's the one I voted for.
And Jake, how about you? What were your thoughts on this semifinals matchup?
I voted for Jojo Rabbit. I didn't really want to go for Joker on that. It's fun and everything, but it's not my thing. Jojo Rabbit was more up the alley, so I went for that. It didn't surprise me as much because people like Taika Waititi. And it's a comedy. It's more of a comedy, I suppose, than...
It's hard not to vote for Hitler.
Yeah, you gotta vote for Hitler, or else he's gonna come get you. He's gonna come back. Oh, wait. So, yeah, I don't know. It was nice. I voted for that. When it comes to Joker, I just really don't know what to say about the movie. It's like something you already kind of know where it's going anyway, so what were we there for?
Well, I mean, there was another film that you already knew where it was going that was successful at the Academy Awards in the box office. It's called Titanic. Little film called Titanic. We knew the ending.
We did.
Spoiler alert, the ship sinks.
Wait, what? I thought that was the Olympic. The Titanic's the one that made it, right? Yeah, I guess that's true. That's like a whole thing. It's just I have so much trouble with media that we've already got. You can either read it yourself, you can read it in a comic book or a book. Whereas Titanic, that's something you've heard about. It's historical. You get to hear retellings and stuff. Hey, we're going to show you this gigantic ass ship sinking. That's cool. I don't want to see the gigantic ship that is Joaquin Phoenix's character sinking.
You can take the route that Tarantino does. It says, just because it historically happened that way doesn't mean I have to retell it that way.
That's very true. It could be very surprising.
George Lucas spent 3 movies telling us that Anakin Skywalker was going to become Darth Vader.
Wait, hold on. You got to cut it out with these spoilers, man.
That can't be. That's impossible.
Search your feelings.
That's also a little crossover and plug for the Rise and Fall of Skywalker series on Patreon now.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks.
I voted for Jojo Rabbit as well, but I was not expecting it to win, because one of the things I've learned more than anything in these tournaments is a lot of the time it comes down to just a popularity contest, and everyone was always falling all over themselves about Joker when it came out. And maybe it was because of a proximity thing to the vote, because by the time the vote came around, Joker was petered out of theaters for the most part, except for the theater chains that were reissuing it for the Best Picture nomination. But Jojo Rabbit was still playing as a slow burn across limited screens, and so it was still out there. But I fully expected the people to vote the way they voted with their box office dollars. I mean, you're talking about a film that made $1 billion worldwide, going up against a film that is fun and quirky and some people have seen. So I was not expecting Jojo Rabbit to win that matchup, but I did vote for it because that was where my pick was. And surprisingly, David slayed Goliath and moves on into the finals now.
How many times has Robert De Niro gotten his brains blown out in a movie? Is this it? Is this the one?
Taxi Driver.
Oh. I forgot about that movie. I brought that up earlier, too.
So basically, if you're Martin Scorsese or you're doing your best Scorsese impression, your aim is to kill Robert De Niro.
You gotta blow his brains on the wall behind him. Yeah.
All right, so that sets up a finals matchup now. We'll get into that, of 1917, which in the semifinals beat Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. In the first round, defeated The Irishman, the other Robert De Niro film of this tournament, going up against Jojo Rabbit, which, as we just mentioned, in the semifinals beat Joker, and in the first round beat Marriage Story. And in the finals, 1917 takes the victory by the smallest of margins of any of the matchups in the tournament, winning with 52% of the vote. And so that will move 1917 into the championship match against Parasite. So, Jake, we'll start with you this time. What were your thoughts on 1917 getting the win over Jojo Rabbit?
It was truly the Great War, which was World War One instead of World War Two. It's kind of interesting. Same thing happened with Wonder Woman a couple of years ago. He set it in World War One instead of World War Two. People liked that. I think it's because we're farther removed. We don't hear too much about World War One. It wasn't such a controversial conflict when you think about some of the things that are going around lately. World War Two had a lot of fascism and etc. World War One was just a bunch of dummies, fighting with each other. That's a fun story compared to, hey, we're going to systematically erase an entire group of people. I hope you guys don't mind. The first one is just like, hey, this guy's cousin and his cousin are pissed off at each other. So they're attacking each other because this one guy of no real note got shot in the chest in a car. Excellent. Nobody really knows what the hell's going on with World War One or why it happened now. Nobody cares. Let's watch that movie versus Hitler, literal Hitler on screen. I don't know. I really think that it's 1917 versus a comedy. When it comes to the Academy Awards, people are gonna go for not the comedy. I think people don't think comedy is Academy Award worthy. Yeah, no, I don't know. I think of course people went with 1917 because again, it's just that proximity. People were thinking about it throughout this whole thing. It stayed at top each time there was a vote.
Is that where you cast your vote in this matchup?
I think I went with Jojo Rabbit again. I don't really remember which one but I'm pretty sure. I mean, if I had to go against 1917, I would have gone with Jojo Rabbit.
So ignore everything you've just said for the last 2 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Because I have a connection to it. But yeah, no, I would rather go with Jojo Rabbit. But I know the people out there would rather think about drama and hardships. That's Academy Award worthy.
And Chris, how about yourself? What were your thoughts on this finals matchup of 1917 versus Jojo Rabbit?
I thought that 1917 deservedly won because of the more broadly accepting portrayal of a film that doesn't really offend anyone.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to be offended by two guys running through the trenches, and you can't even be mad at the Germans because you don't really see many of them except for one woman. Jojo Rabbit definitely takes that to task of, I'm going to take the most offensive person in the history of the world and make him a dominant character in the piece, a good supporting role, and make him a comic character, comic relief to boot. So let's see if that works. And that's a riskier proposition. And if you're getting to the end of a contest, and it's the one who played safe and did it very, very well, and the other who took a major risk and could still have some animosity carried over from even doing that risk well, it's 1917 that's going to win. I mean, you had two war movies up against each other, so it's kind of washed out.
And so 1917 where you cast your vote?
Oh, yeah.
For me, I cast my vote for 1917 as well. But I've thought of something for Jojo Rabbit, and since we're pitching ideas to, huge Hollywood moguls who are tuning in to the Weekend Take, pause for laughter. I would like to see a sequel to Jojo Rabbit set in present time where Jojo's grandson has an imaginary friend that is Donald Trump.
Ooh.
Oh my God.
Jojo's grandson, Dodo.
That's it right there. The sequel to Jojo Rabbit. Taika Waititi, are you listening? I know you're not, but somebody knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who's not listening to the show.
Tarantino, since Tarantino's listening, call up Waititi and get him on the horn, get him working on that project, and you guys can do a double bill. I know you like that.
There you go.
That kind of takes me to that. Where's the Traveling Wilburys version, film version? Where like, I don't know, Steven Spielberg was having dinner with Martin Scorsese one night, and they decided to write a movie and they called up their friend, Aaron Sorkin, and he got involved, and it's just like some of the greatest people all put together this one movie.
We were talking about the origin of Indiana Jones trilogy,
Mm-hmm.
and how that started with a couple of people taking vacations together.
That's true.
We talked about it on Rise and Fall of Skywalker. George Lucas skips the premiere to his own movie, goes on vacation with Steven Spielberg, and creates Raiders of the Lost Ark.
There you go.
I want more people, though. More people involved. Like, get Danny DeVito in there. Catherine Bigelow. Get her.
So that brings us then to our championship matchup, where we'll see 1917, who in the finals of the tournament beat Jojo Rabbit, in the semifinals defeated Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and in the first round defeated The Irishman, going up against the reigning, defending, Academy Award winning Best Picture champion, Parasite. Yes. And in that matchup, Parasite successfully defends its crown, winning the final championship matchup with 57% of the vote.
Looks like the Academy got it wrong.
And so, Chris,
Yes.
tell us your thoughts on Parasite defending the crown against 1917. And was 1917, of all the other nominees, the film that probably Parasite should have been defending its title against?
That's an interesting question. I think so. That 1917 was definitely deserved to be head to head against Parasite as a contender. Some of the other entries in the 9 films that were in the Best Picture contention, a little more suspect, a little more politically motivated to be nominated there. But 1917 definitely stood its ground and is the kind of film that should be in the discussion. When it's up against Parasite, and you've heard me go on and on about how I felt about Parasite and how well it executed everything it did, we're finding that Bong Joon-ho is right in the prime of his creativity, and he can do anything he would like in Korean cinema, because they will build a city with a complete underground that you can flood with sewage just because you need it in the film. He is hitting on all cylinders, and he's also telling universal stories by keeping things personal, which is an incredible facility for a filmmaker to be able to not only talk about something you know well and tell it from your perspective, but telling it in a manner that everybody can understand. And he overcame all the obstacles for a foreign language film, for a film from a director that most people can't even pronounce his name, let alone know his history of filmmaking behind, and pull off something so well done that it's an achievement that I hope it's one of many, but I'm so happy that it happened in my lifetime to see something that was so well executed and universal in story. It's unique. I guess you can tell which one I voted for.
1917, right? You were talking about 1917 that whole time, right? No?
You need to change your meds, dude.
Sorry, it's this quarantine. I'm getting cabin fever.
No, Parasite, man. Parasite.
Well, that's why I'm quarantined. I have a parasite. Oh, you're talking about Just joking. I'm not quarantined, nor do I have a parasite. Jake, how about you? What were your thoughts on this? As you said before, it's like, oh no, the Academy got it wrong. Jokingly, what were your thoughts on Parasite versus 1917? And in your opinion, was 1917, I guess, the next best thing to go up against Parasite in this final pairing, or would you have rather seen another one of the nominees?
Accordingly, with the Academy, like the Academy Award Best Picture kind of thing, I would say 1917 out of all of them would fit it best, probably. It's that Joker Irishman, really, when it comes to visuals. And I would take Joker out of that. 1917, The Irishman, up for the possibilities there. Visually stunning, etc., whatever. But then again, I would have to give it to Parasite, which I did. and gave it to Parasite because I think that's absolutely epic. But 1917 is probably the best contender for Parasite out of this entire list. I would say Joker would be a third contender and Irishman a second. Yeah, really, I really have nothing else to. He kind of took it all.
Sorry.
I agree with everything he said earlier regarding Parasite versus 1917.
Yeah, I mean, and the film itself took it all too. I believe
Yeah.
it was nominated for 6 awards and it won 6 awards. Did it not?
Yeah, they won. I think what out of what when I last looked at the amount of nominations that got completely worldwide, they were at it was like 300 awards that they were nominated for, and he won 200 or so. Absolutely amazing! Like to sweep just the world's awards market. It's great, absolutely great to see that, especially to have a foreign film take the Academy Award for Best Picture.
And for it to be coming from South Korea, which is not known for its cinema, so it will be now.
You know that's really funny because I've seen so many South Korean films over the years that end up showing they end up here. We end up seeing them at the local cinemas and stuff like that. It's kind of interesting to think that it wasn't somebody else first though, some other.
Well, I mean, South Korean has been making mark in genre movies.
Yeah.
And that's actually how Bong Joon-ho started his films, and he still loves to make genre movies, and probably always will.
Yeah, who did The Good, the Bad, and the Weird? I remember that film. That was South Korean, I think. Kim Ji-woon. Yeah, South Korean. Yeah. So yeah, I saw this. It came out in 2010. This was one of the earlier ones that I noted from them. They came out in 2008, I think, in South Korea, but it was 2010 when we got it over here. Very, very fun film. It's a Western. I think that was probably my first foray into South Korean films, and then after that you end up here. It's great in just 10 years from my first experience to having a Best Picture from the same country.
That's one of the aspects about the Oscars that a lot of the other awards programs don't have, and that it is internationally recognized as an accolade.
Mm-hmm.
BAFTA is great in the UK, but American filmmakers who haven't gotten outside of the country probably wouldn't know one or the other. And there are a number like the Caesars and all the other internationally prestigious films that are awards that are given to films in their local countries. Even though they do have the broader categories, it's still a local event, whereas the Oscars really isn't just America's films. It's a broader scope. And so winning an Oscar does have that little extra cachet.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks.
And now for director Bong Joon-ho, American audiences are going to get much more familiar with his work because one of his earlier films that did make a domestic bow, which was
Snowpiercer,
Mm-hmm.
has a television series. And there is a limited series in treatment phase of Parasite now as well.
Mm.
So American audiences are going to become much more familiar with Bong Joon-ho's work. That's certainly something that's going to be good to expose American audiences to, because yes, one of the big things that Parasite had to overcome is American audiences as a whole not being immediately receptive to foreign language films or films that are subtitled, mainly because I think some of the population just either, like for instance, my wife, for instance, won't watch subtitled films because she feels that she's missing the film visually because she's reading what's at the bottom of the screen. So I can understand that.
that's how I feel.
Yeah. So interesting to see Snowpiercer and Parasite on the small screen now, as well as the big screen.
Yeah, I think we were talking about that when I was on last time about the subtitles versus dubbing.
Yeah, because Parasite was still in the top 10 when you were on the show, and so we talked about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I really think that we should end up getting dubbed films here, just like a lot of foreign countries get dubbed films from us. I wouldn't mind it. You have the option to watch subtitles or dubs in a lot of cases. I'd say leave it open to us. If I don't want to, I don't really care personally if it syncs up. As long as I get the story and I can watch what's happening visually, I think it works for me.
My biggest point against the idea of dubbing is there's a lot of really bad voice actors out there.
Yeah.
I worry that a bad dub could potentially affect the way you perceive a film and its performance, because if the dub is bad,
Yeah.
then you feel like the performance is bad and can hurt the film.
In China, they have a specific actor for each actor. It's very amazing. There's a Bruce Willis over there. Every Bruce Willis film, one person.
The problem with dubbing is that it is actors hired by the distribution company, not the production company.
Yeah. And that's why I'd like to see it all come from the beginning.
It's a different metric.
I'd like to see the filmmaker audition and cast the people dubbing.
Yeah.
Yeah. That'd be really great. If from the very onset of production, you're ready to get this out to other international markets, from any market, sending it here, from us sending it there. It'd be amazing to have something like that.
All right, guys. Well, I mean, that wraps it up for the Defend the Crown tournament. This year, Parasite defends its titles, so the people agree with the Academy.
And me.
And Chris, that this was the right choice. We'll have to see if that holds up next year when we do this again. But before I let you both go, if listeners on the show want to learn more about either of you or what you're up to or what you do, how can they best do that? Jake, I guess we'll start with you.
All right. You can find me at Instagram.com/Carnus, on Facebook at Facebook.com/AmenTheSeries, and www.continentalpictures.org.
Chris, how about yourself? If people want to get in touch with you and learn more about what you're up to, how can they best do that?
Well, they can read my columns at scriptmag.com or follow my tweets, Chris Schiller, ChrisSchiller, and that will get you pretty much sick of what I've been talking about and how I say things. So.
As always, listeners can follow The Weekend Take on social media. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/The Weekend Take. We're on Twitter at Weekend Take. We've joined the Instagram universe, and so we're on Instagram as well at The Weekend Take. And of course, check out our Patreon campaign at www.patreon.com/The Weekend Take, where for as little as $1 per month, you can become a patron of The Weekend Take and get exclusive access to extended cuts of episodes. In case you want to hear more of the conversation that myself, Jake, and Chris had today, or any of our previous guests. You also get early access to episodes, and starting this season, you get Patreon patron exclusive episodes, like our current 13-episode series, The Rise and Fall of Skywalker, looking at the Star Wars franchise from the prequels to the original trilogy to the sequel trilogy, and then looking at spin-offs like Solo and Rogue One, looking at series like The Mandalorian, and then the future of the Star Wars franchise, which actually, Chris, you'll be joining us later in the Rise and Fall of Skywalker season for a couple episodes, I believe.
Yep. Can't wait.
Again, that's patreon.com/The Weekend Take. But otherwise, that wraps it up for the tournament, gentlemen. Thank you again both so much for taking the time to chat with us today about it.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure.
And for the listeners, thank you for tuning in, and I will catch you all next week. Take care. Bye.
You've been listening to The Weekend Take. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and Google Play, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks.